Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us. My name is Deborah Webster. I'll be your moderator for this session. Just going to give a few minutes for other participants to come in. In the meantime, I'll just give some color and flavor because the rest of you are here on time, so thanks for that. So we have a really interesting lineup. We have Rudolf Pseiler, who is the chairman of Finance Malta. We have Juanita Bencini, who I'm sure all of you are very familiar with, who's also Malta-based, and we wanted to bring a global perspective to this and also a data perspective. So we have Olivier Hatib, who is the co-founder and chief data scientist for SenseFolio. And SenseFolio is a platform that monitors ESG ratings of companies and also countries. The countries when they do behind the scenes. So we'll have some data insights, some data perspective there as well. The reason I think the data angle is interesting is because the more complex the world becomes, the more we have to, the more complicated it is to navigate truth from fiction. We've seen quite a lot of disruption over the last few years in terms of citizens, the democracies being hacked with fake news, etc., and the more we, as the more time progresses, the more human decision making will partner with data. So I wanted to kind of get a sense of how that looks. And also, of course, speaking about the elephant in the room, everyone knows that Malta is going through the Moneyval process. And this is not to criticize Malta, just to kind of give you a personal perspective. I'm half Maltese and half English. And my mother, who's the Maltese one, used to say to me, when I criticize you, I don't criticize you, I criticize your behavior because you're better than your behavior. And so for me, when we need to analyze the issues, what's causing disruption, especially from a reputational perspective, so that we learn from those lessons and we adjust our behaviors to build strong economy going forward. So with no further ado, I want to kick off our first question. What are trust and transparency, and why do they matter?
So thank you, Deborah, for inviting me to this panel, and good afternoon to you as well as to the attendees. When we're talking about trust and transparency, the two go very well with each other. And when we're talking about financial service industry, trust is a very important pillar of the sector. So the financial service industry is built on the foundations of trust. And transparency, in my opinion, is an essential part in creating the trust. However, the trust and transparency is enhanced by the collective behavior of all the stakeholders within the industry. So it's the responsibility of the collective behavior. It's a collective behavior responsibility. And that's important because it takes everyone to enhance the transparency of a particular country. So one can say that the trust is a crucial component to mutually beneficial relationships between the financial service stakeholders. So it's like a bridge. It's connecting relationships between the financial service provider, for example, and the regulator, the financial service provider and the client, or the financial service providers which are rendering a service to a client and the client himself. And that is important, and that's why trust, in my opinion, is a bridge. So it is also in the interest of each country to score highly when it comes to trust and transparency index, because failing to do so can have far-reaching consequences for the country when it comes to its consumers, its economy, and at the end of the day as well, its reputation. So yes, trust and trustees for a country which is promoting itself as an international financial services center is very, very important. But it's also important to look at what Malta is doing vis-a-vis transparency. And before I delve into the detail, I would like to tackle an important point, which is Paradise Papers. Yeah. So in the past, I mean.
Wow, you're wasting no time, Rudolf. Go for it. Thank you.
No, I think it's important because unfortunately there has been negative connotation in the past, yeah, vis-a-vis Paradise Papers, and I think it's important to address this misconception. So we had these paradise papers where the information was shared with the public around 2017, which was a year before, after Panama Papers. And unfortunately, in the Paradise Papers, there was Malta. And in addition to Malta, there was information disclosed from registers of Cook Islands, Antigua, Barbados, BVIs. So obviously, the negative connotation which you normally surround or associate with these countries were unfortunately attributed to Malta. And it's important to understand why it's not an issue, why this Paradise Paper was an issue for Malta on international level. The information which was disclosed in the Panama paper was information which is included in the Registry of Companies website. So if you access the Registry of Companies website, you're going to find information about directors, the company secretary, the auditors, the legal representation, the registered office, and also all the documents which the directors or the company secretary submit to the Registry of Companies. So basically, anyone can have access to this registry, which now is called Malta Business Register, and can download all the information. So if someone has downloaded that information and is calling it Paradise Paper, then there's nothing new there, because all the information which was included in this so-called Paradise Papers information which was already available to the public. And it's important to understand this, because at the end of the day, it's not something which was not available to the public, and thanks to this Paradise Paper, then the public came to know information which they wouldn't have known if such disclosure was not made. So that's Paradise Paper. And so putting Paradise Paper aside, I would like to focus a bit of how Malta deals with transparency. And in answering such question, I would like to delve into the roles and responsibilities and the obligations of directors and the company services providers here in Malta. Because a lot is mentioned about the directors, and the directors might not disclose information, but I would like to share that information. Yeah. We have, as we said, we have the Malta Business Register, where all the companies, once they are incorporated, all the information related to that particular company is included in the MBR website. Then we have the BO Register. So all the information about the ultimate beneficial owner is also accessible by the public, and is also saved on this public database. Then we have the obligation that each company in Malta needs to prepare accounts, and all the accounts of those companies need to be audited. And the audited financial statements are also included in this MBR website. So you can download the audited financial statements of any company that you want. Yeah. So again, it's transparency. Then we have the CRS and FATCA. So CRS is the Common Reporting Standards, which is derived by the EU, where every year the directors have to report. First, you have to classify each and every company. And then if the classifications fall within, for example, definition of a financial institution, then the directors are obliged to report to the tax authority every year. The same applies for FATCA. Again, it's driven by the US, but it's again an annual obligation of reporting to the tax authority. As directors of CSPs, for example, we are also responsible to report to the authorities once a year. So every January, we receive 2 very long questionnaires from the regulator, the MFSA, and the FIU, which is the Financial Intelligence Analysis Union. They will include around 200 to 300 questions, and we have to answer each and every question. Again, we're sharing information about the portfolio to the regulator, so that the regulator can risk rate each service provider, and then based on that risk rating, they will conduct a compliance visits. So we are also subject to compliance visits by the regulator as well as FIU. We also have, so when we're talking about transparency, when FIU, for example, conducts a visit to one of the subject persons and notices any issues, and that subject person is subject to a penalty, that information is of public knowledge. So it includes in its website the information and the issues encountered in that visit, the name of the party, as well as the amount of the penalty. So again, it's transparency. Then we have Dax-6, which again is a new requirement, which is driven by the EU, where the service providers need to assess each and every transaction to see whether such transaction is being done in order to evade tax.
Okay, Rudolf, can I interject here? Because I'm getting some questions in from the audience. So first of all, thank you very much for being so transparent and forthcoming about some issues. There's still a perception. So what you're saying, so for instance, the Paradise Papers, what you're highlighting is there is a difference between reality and perception, because the perception is that the Paradise Papers were a leak of confidential papers, not readily available documents. So, and were they the ones still linked with Mossack, let me see, my understanding is that the Paradise Papers was a leak of confidential papers from the offices of Mossack Fonseca. So,
Mossack Fonseca was related to Panama Papers, not Paradise Papers. Right?
So, because people hear papers, they just kind of assume it's all part of the same thing. So, thank you for clarifying that. And you also bring up the issue, however, of regulation. Like you took us through a whole bunch of different things that are being done, and yet there still seems to be a gap, right? So for instance, we're inundated with news stories of audit firms implicated in bad audit or financial irregularities, etc. I mean, Wirecard is the most recent one, right? KPMG was in the FT this morning. KPMG for the UK. So this is a global issue. So although we have regulation, we're still where is the problem here? Is it the people? Is it the processes? Is it maybe Juanita, you want to take on board that question, because I know you also wanted to chime in on your view on trust and transparency and why it matters.
Yeah, so I'd like to sort of start off with, so first of all, good afternoon, and good afternoon to everybody, and thank you, Deborah, for inviting us to this panel. As we can see, so 13 minutes in, we're already having a very interesting discussion, so it's extremely promising. Yeah, so I'd just like to take a bit of a step back about this trust and transparency, which today we seem to bundle together, right? And I agree with Rudolf 100% in the sense that the financial services industry all over the world is based on trust. And it does bridge the relationship between various stakeholders within that particular sector. But in truth, if we were to look back, I mean, people were more trusting of other people in the past. It's just that as things have evolved and, you know, the media has become what it is today, very incisive, very timely information, also their intention with each other to bring out stuff first as well. We have to accept. So sometimes they act on snippets of information rather than actually investigate. Today, in order to trust somebody, we need them to be transparent as well. So to me, that's why today we have lumped them together. So the accent today is more on the transparency, because it is conceived that if you are transparent and therefore you can be trusted. Now, with regards to regulation, I mean, regulation is always a cat and mouse game, right? It's always trying to block holes that others have uncovered. And regulation, if you see, ever since the financial crisis, has all been about disclosure, about transparency, all the remuneration of directors of banks. I mean, you know, before it used to be lumped together. We didn't have insight into all the variable remuneration they were receiving. Now it needs to be disclosed separately. Is this effective? I mean, human beings are what they are. And regulation can always try to play catch up as far as I'm concerned. I think that, you know, obviously it has helped a lot. Sometimes I question whether the general public for whom all this transparency is done is really interested or has the technical prowess or the time to actually go through the details. I mean, look at an annual report and you will see, I mean, it's practically unintelligible to an average man in the street unless, you know, you've got the know-how on how to read financial statements and all the notes that come with it. So I don't blame regulators. That is what is expected of them. And as I said, in order to foster trust, especially in financial services, their reaction to it is be more and more transparent. Does it help? I think it has gone a long way, and I think now, and I don't speak only of Malta, but obviously Malta being part of the EU, so this is a new wide thing. I think we're all getting used to the fact that we have to be much more transparent, especially if we take on public roles. Which some people say is one of the reasons why some people don't venture into politics, but it's true. I mean, you're practically an open book. Everything needs to be disclosed. And if you haven't disclosed it, someone's going to find it out, right? So it's something that is here to stay. And with the media being what it is, I think it's always going to be a question of, yes, you know, having to disclose more and more and more. I mean, now we're seeing, and possibly Olivier can give us a lot of insight into this, on companies having to disclose their ESG policies. I mean, that seems to be the big thing now, especially during the pandemic. So over to you again. Mute. You're on mute.
Thank you, Juanita. You bring up a really good point. I want to just kind of clarify something. You gave the example of financial reports and that the average man on the street probably wouldn't be able to understand them. So isn't part of our responsibility for being transparent to put things instead of, because if, for instance, there's a report that's got 50 pages, 100 pages, and there's a piece of information buried in the middle of it. Yes, you can say you're being transparent because you put it in there, but you have to go through with a fine tooth comb. So we're not actually being transparent, right? We're still being massively opaque, and we need to write things in simple English. Your view?
Well, I mean, a question of simple English. I mean, if you look at an annual report and all the notes, those are driven by accounting standards. So you can't really put them into simple English if you have to observe those standards. So one comes with the other. And really, you know, it's a feedback loop. So standards keep requesting more information to be disclosed in the hope that people will know more what they're investing in and understanding more. And then you get more of the public saying we're not understanding less and less. I mean, think of IFRS 9, for example. I mean, some horrific standards out there. Is it our duty to make things simple? Well, if it isn't, as I said, I don't think we can really simplify things, but then that's where financial journalism comes in. And that's something that, for example, in Malta, we don't have much of, unfortunately. So people who have the know-how and the skills and the academic background to actually go through you know, a set of financial statements and actually dig deep and find out the things that they need to reveal. Having said that, we have had a couple that are doing a very good job, but literally just one or two people that I can think of that really know how to read financial statements and actually put their finger on where it hurts.
Okay, so that's a brilliant suggestion. Rudolf, may I make a suggestion? Perhaps this is something that Finance Malta wants to champion of, you know, maybe creating a sub-course at the university. Maybe we could sponsor some some next gens who are interested in creating more transparency and democratizing the understanding of financial instruments so that people aren't duped. You know what I mean? So that's a little seed that I'm planting, because the objective of this webinar is to not only identify the core issues, but also come up with innovative solutions to go forward. How does that sound?
No, education is always important, and I don't think that we should limit it only to financial instruments. I think we should start from much basic principles and make the public at large familiar with responsibilities, with certain terminologies related to financial services. Because at the end of the day, there's lack of information. Yeah. And unfortunately, as Juanita said, even journalists sometimes lack the financial knowledge. So what we have is, and now with the use of social media, everyone is an expert. So everyone starts commenting on something related to financial services.
Everyone has an opinion, but they're not experts, and that's why.
No, it's important to, everyone has an opinion, it's important to express your opinion, but it's important as well that when you're expressing an opinion, you're expressing an opinion based on facts, yeah? Just expressing an opinion just for the sake of expressing an opinion, then you can do it, but I don't think it's right. So I think it's important that the education aspect has to cover at least the basic notions related to financial services, not just financial instruments.
Right, so I'm going to follow up with you to set up some things so that we can tackle that issue. Okay, thank you guys. So Olivier, everyone's made reference to you and that you're going to bring some data into the issue. So looking at data across institutions and countries globally, do trust and transparency come into it? And what three things have a positive impact and what three things have a negative impact?
Yeah, so, well, first of all, thanks for inviting to this panel. And good afternoon to all of the attendees. It's great to be speaking here. I'm going to give some insights. I just wanted to go back to what Juanita said previously regarding, we were talking about the reports themselves. Personally, I graduated in the UK 5 years ago, and that was back then when there was this trend for companies to disclose on their ESG and CSR reports. And what I've noticed, and what I was actually surprised of.
Just to explain what ESG is for some of our audience who may not be familiar, it's environmental, social, and governance aspects. Thank you. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Karen.
But it's become like a very, like a report that companies have to disclose, especially in Western Europe or in America. And when you look at those reports, they're very well done, well made, with nice presentations, nice images, so that everyone can understand it, and especially like the new generation and millennials can understand it, quickly and simply, with a summary table, etc. So this is why, from a millennial point of view, this is where the trend is going to from companies themselves and the reports. So yeah, going back to your questions about trust and transparency, from looking at the data themselves, what we've noticed is that investors are looking more and more into the company's ESG aspects. We've had a lot of demand for the company's controversy screenings, such as tax fraud, accounting controversies, business ethics, as well as, for example, management compensation. People are looking at it more and more to see if there are very big gaps between, certain stakeholders or employees or the management, etc. So that's what we've seen recently. Since we've started Sensefolio. And what we've seen as well is that, people, our clients are demanding more and more data, and they're subscribing to our service because we provide a lot of information and a lot of data. And I feel like everyone is battling to get the latest data and more data. So the more data, I guess, I mean, there's a correlation between, transparency and having a lot of data. So the more data you have about a certain company, usually it means this company is very transparent, right? And what we've seen is that governance is very significantly negatively impacted whenever there's a very bad news about trust and transparency. So whenever there's a company or or government that is being badly covered by the media, that will significantly impact their ESG scores and the governance scores. And also what we've actually realized is that all of those bad news about companies or governments are usually preceded by a relatively low governance score. So over a year or 6 month timeline, you can see a relatively low governance score and subscription. Sorry, and the final ESG score as well. So this is one of the studies we've made recently with the analysis of Wirecard in Germany, where we could see that the governance score was being very low over the past 2 years, and then the accounting fraud happened, got released in the media, and they got exposed significantly. So, but what we could see is that the governance score was being very low for a few years. In the past few years.
So thank you for that. And for those who are interested in the study that Sensfolio did on Wirecard, it's absolutely fascinating. It's on their website. I highly recommend it because what I saw when I saw that is there are telltale signs that the algo is picking up that predicts if, for instance, a stock is going to go down, right? So I'm always looking at leadership changes in publicly listed companies, and then kind of predicting what will happen to the share price and what will happen to it going forward. So it's fascinating. I find your space so interesting. So thank you for that. I'm just curious, looking at all that data and looking at all the examples, because there's a lot of bad news in the world, right? There's a lot of bad governance, but so bad stuff happens. But from the data, does it show that how you handle the bad news matters, and how you handle, for instance, if there is potential controversy, how you handle it determines and impacts your governance score and therefore the impact on the company or the economy? Have you seen that?
So bad information and the bad news would have a significant impact on the scores. And there's this concept of half-life, where if there's a bad news, the impact will be, significant for a while. So, for example, for companies and governments, that could be up to 6 months. So you wouldn't be surprised of having a low score for a little while, because you're assuming that those governments and companies are taking, it's very hard to be very quick and fast at responding to those bad news, right? So you have to implement a new management and structural change within your organization, right? So with transparent leadership, outlining very transparent plans and policies in place. So this is one way of having a positive impact and how to react positively to bad news, right? Then another way, I'm talking from an investor's point of view. as an investor, you want a good and steady economic performance from a company or even from a country. So you feel more comfortable, more, willing to invest in a stable country, and where the growth is going up and steadily. You don't want a very volatile country. You don't want a very volatile government. And that's what we're analyzing using our scores. If we see a lot of volatility, investors and potential entrepreneurs won't be willing to go into that country or companies, right? So I guess people want stability and transparency coming from the management or the government in place, and also they want transparency along the whole supply chain. So they it's really depending on the regulations in the country, the transparency of payments, the anti-corruption policies, good governance policies in place by the company or the government.
So it's having the policies, but also the implementation and enforcement of them, right? Because having policies alone, if you don't follow through, like there's not a lot of point. So I presume that would negatively impact the governance score, right?
It goes back to also the score. When we look at the scores of certain companies or even governments, if you see a lot of volatility, what does that mean? That means that the government or the company has said something. It's stated in some news or media that they have the policy now in place to combat corruption or anything that is not transparent or anything. So then the score would go up significantly, right? But if you see a big drop, that means that score didn't make sense because very bad news happened straight after, So if you see this kind of lines where it's going up big time and then it's plummeting significantly right after, that's not adding much confidence about for the investor or the entrepreneur who wants to settle in a certain country, right?
So we've actually created a forum on the Malta Business Network website, so we can continue the discussion, because of course unpacking all the issues in 1 hour is near impossible. But we want to have an ongoing conversation in order to find sustainable solutions going forward. So what I will do is I will share some of the reports that Olivier very kindly put together for us, and you'll see. So one of the ones, for instance, compares Malta as a financial jurisdiction with Ireland and with Luxembourg. And because one of the things that I hear a lot is, well, other jurisdictions do this. Well, yes, maybe. And yet Malta is very small, right? Malta is the size of a company. So one could argue that we should be nimble enough to use this as an opportunity to differentiate ourselves from the others. And the cleaner our G score, the more stable we look, and therefore the more positive business would attract. We don't just want any old business. We want positive business that's clean business. Is that a fair? I believe you all concur, right? It's always so good to have agreement. Right. There are some questions that are coming in. So let me because I know we mentioned regulation before, and Bethel had a question, which is the problem that regulators are not staffed by people with long industry knowledge rather than civil servants with no industry background? Who would like to answer that one?
Okay, so I'm not too sure I understood the question properly. So is the question, why are regulators staffed by young?
It's a question of, because we've got the regulation, right? But then in order to make sure it's being implemented correctly, we need to have people with the right level of competence to know what to be looking for. So the question is the problem that regulators aren't staffed by the right people, in a nutshell?
Well, I mean, yes, that's a fair comment. It is a fair comment, and it's something that we are, as Maltese, now I speak, with my Maltese hat on, we're very conscious of, and it's something that we keep telling our regulators, that they are staffed mainly with young people. Their senior management cohort is made up of people that are 35. Now, obviously, I have nothing against people who are 35, but obviously you need a few gray hairs sometimes to deal with the complexity of business.
Or a few gray hairs.
Yeah, exactly. Hidden ones. But the truth is that financial services has grown very quickly within Malta, and I think we made a mistake in not anticipating the demand, and that includes also our educators. So we were a bit myopic. I mean, I for one remember at the point when Solvency II was being brought in, we were begging university to come up with an actuarial course. We had no actuaries in Malta. We had to import all the talent, pay a lot of money, bring actuaries over, and it took them years. I mean, today there is the course, but everything is so reactive, and I think there's a bit of a disconnect between where the industry wants to go and what university is churning out. So there needs to be an alignment over there. But this is not something that is just that the regulators are suffering from. I mean, it's also the industry, from what I hear. I mean, you get people, a lot of staff turnover, people being poached while sitting at their desks. Now, this is all new for Malta, I mean, a few years ago, headhunting was absolutely unheard of. So yes, we do have a national problem. And until we get together, the industry, together with the regulators, together with the educators, and we start, channeling people into certain courses which may be a bit obscure. I mean, if you say take a degree in risk management, to the average man in the street, what is risk management? It means nothing. What is actuarial science? You know what I mean? But so you have to convince a 13, a 15, a 16-year-old to start taking that part. So I think we really need to come together. But very valid comment. We're all suffering from this. Yeah.
Okay, great. So a takeaway from a takeaway we could all do is for finance professionals to also break down their role. I remember being at a mentoring event to encourage, was focused specifically on young girls. And I recall, asking some young girls what they want to do when they grow up. And a lot of them wanted to be accountants. And I was listening to some other people saying, how nice, and then passing on ahead and carrying on. And I was like, well, I don't want to challenge them. And so I asked them if they've ever heard of a CFO, a chief financial officer. And I explained to them what a CFO does. And their eyes lit up. So we need to also challenge them in broadening their horizons and making the work that we do kind of more alive. So, okay, I'm going to have that as a separate thread, I think, on the discussion panel, so we can start solving all these issues. Okay, so thank you very much, Juanita. Transparency has audiences, transparency to the regulator, to the auditor, with the media, to the public, and the latter is only needed when others fail. Why are the others failing, and how can we hold ourselves to a better standard? And this individual has shared some examples. Evidence of failing includes Moneyval, Pilatus, MFSA, CEO issues, incentives for FIU to issue funds, etc., etc. Who would like to take that one?
I can take that one. If we refer to Moneyval, yes, we had an assessment by Moneyval, and the assessment wasn't positive. It highlighted a number of issues in certain areas. Those areas, obviously, were areas where we had to work on, we had to improve. But as you said, I don't think it's just only important that you have issues. I think it's important as well that you take on board what was being referred to you and address those issues. Yeah, and that's, for example, what Malta did. So we had the NCC, National Coordinating Committee, which are doing. They have put a lot of effort in conjunction with the other authorities to address the issues highlighted in the Moneyval report. And what is important is that we are addressing those issues not because of the need to avoid being grey-listed, but because we want to continue attracting sustainable investment. And that's, I think, where we have to go. And when you have a financial services industry like Malta, who developed very quickly, then obviously you're going to have issues, because that's what happens when you, as a country, develops very quickly. But I think you have to be humble enough to accept the wrongdoing and say, all right, let's address those issues and make sure that these issues will not appear again.
So not denying something.
Yes, I think it's important.
May I ask a question though? I mean, if we put hand on heart, because sometimes we choose to not ask questions because it's convenient for us, because it could potentially impact our bottom line, right? I mean, I've seen this with audit firms where there's rumors around a particular, well, not just rumors around particular companies, but we don't ask the extra question because we want them as a client, right? So,
to be honest, I don't think it's a very short-sighted comment, if I am allowed to say that. Because if you're looking at directors, for example, yeah, I mean, I went through a lot of obligations that the directors are subject to. So do you think that a director is going to accept or onboard a client where he's going to earn 10,000 euros, but then risk damage his reputation permanently, or risk having issues with the regulator? I mean, the penalties are far more than the reward. And at the end of the day, we're trying to attract sustainable investment.
okay, so yes, but you actually bring up a very good point, right? It is, so first of all, some people don't recognize reputational damage, right? Now they do, before they didn't. I remember having a conversation with an individual in Malta and about this particular issue, and it was 4 or 5 years ago. And he said, you bring up a very good point, but we're all doing well, and none of us want to challenge the status quo. So, and if the fines are not, if there are no fines, then there is no cost to them.
Yeah, I mean,
maybe now it's changed. I mean, look at YMBD in Malaysia and Goldman Sachs, right? There are a number of these cases around the world. It's not just in Malta, but the reason why I always stress that it matters in Malta, and we've got to be really, really careful about reputation, is because if you get a boulder and you throw it at an aircraft carrier, right, it doesn't really make an impact. It doesn't have that huge of a dent. But if you get this boulder and you throw it at a speedboat, then it could sink it, right? And when you consider the size of the economy and how interconnected it is with, and for instance, financial services is very interconnected with other sectors, right? And also the government, then these things matter. Like look, Malta's fascinating because we have all the issues that we have in the rest of the world, but I always describe Malta as the parfum, and the rest of the world is the eau de toilette. So if we identify these issues and we come up with clever solutions, we could actually scale them into other jurisdictions, because other jurisdictions are hurting. So it behooves us to think innovatively to tackle these. But we need to call a spade, in my personal humble opinion. Anyway.
That's fine. Yeah.
There's a very long comment there, so I'm going to leave that for later. That's okay. So being transparent will build trust. Does the panel think that companies and governments that are more open this way are more successful? And if they are, why? And do companies and organizations fail to do this? Who would like to take that?
Well, I think we have already alluded to this, right? About, I think Olivier mentioned, the more information you have out there, the indication is that there is more transparency and therefore you're to be trusted more. But as we said before, I think it's the quality of information. So if you just, regurgitate stuff, I mean, and if you look at some of the annual reports, for example, they're exactly the same wording year in, year out. And why should that be? It shouldn't. It should be reflecting what has happened in the last year. So does that mean the more you regurgitate into the public domain, does that make you more transparent and therefore there are no issues? I mean, we've had stories like Wirecard and other big name companies which had a lot of information out there, but still there was stuff happening beneath the surface. So in answer to the question that was posed, I don't think that automatically the more transparent you are, that automatically is a badge of approval that therefore you can be you're above the pale type of situation.
I would disagree. Wirecard was not transparent. In fact, if you look into the study that Folio put together, and also I've done my own analysis on the media interviews with the CEO. So in 2019, when the CEO was asked about certain controversy around Wirecard, he deflected it. And he said, we don't tend to focus on that. We focus on growth and innovation. And I think the lesson for all of us is deflection, and saying it's not, we're focused on growth and innovation is not the answer. I think the smart play is to tackle it head on, because people are not stupid. But anyway, there's an interesting comment here from someone that says, I think the most important thing for Malta's reputation in the long run is transparency and lawfulness. Corruption and fraud should be exposed and addressed in accordance with law. Cover-ups are the worst possible thing and might bring short-term benefits, but only make the problems get worse and continue into the future. There was an interesting article actually last week about this in Love in Malta, where there was another bribery issue, and the journalist said, maybe this is Malta's Me Too moment. Maybe we need to come up with, encourage whistleblowers to come forward and in order to tackle it. But I appreciate from a cultural perspective that goes very much against what we are, but that means we're going to be our own worst enemy. How are we going to tackle this?
We've got quite a lot of growing up to do. I think I'm an optimist by nature. I like to learn from my mistakes and pick myself up and carry on. And I think this is what the country needs to do. And I'm fully confident that we can get over, what I would like to think is the bottom of the trough and start looking forward. But it doesn't mean that the world will look exactly as we've known it. I think that obviously now we have got used to regulators that are going to be much more incisive and breathing over our necks, but that's what is happening in Europe as well. So let's get used to it. Perhaps we're used to, regulators which were not enough resources were being put onto enforcement and supervision, but this is here to stay now. But what that will mean is that there will be a consolidation in the market, because definitely, I mean, this is going to mean a lot of compliance costs, and as we said before, you need certain people with certain skills, which are hard to come by and expensive to recruit. So definitely, there's going to be a consolidation in the market, but I don't think it's a bad thing. I mean, one of the unofficial numbers that was being touted around until a few months ago was that between those licensed CSPs that we had in Malta, together with the unlicensed ones, as in, the warranted lawyers, accountants, which didn't need a license under the current law, there must have been over 600 people offering CSP services in this tiny rock in the Mediterranean. Should a country of this size have so many CSPs? I'd much rather for one see, a shrinking of that into people who have the appropriate setup, the appropriate compliance structures, the appropriate AML procedures to be able to really be the gatekeeper letting companies into Malta. But I think one of the things that we need to remember is every jurisdiction has its bad apples, and it's going to happen in the future, no matter how much we raise our guard. It's the name of the game, right? I mean, this is the risk you need to take. I mean, I remember, for example, when we were setting up our funds industry, and at that point in time, we advisors were just looking at setting up one fund after the other. I remember having discussions with my counterparts at KPMG in Cayman Islands, and they said, you should be thinking about setting up a restructuring division. And I said, restructuring, why? And they said, well, once you create them, at some point in time, they're going to drop off, they're going to go into liquidation, you need to restructure them, so think ahead. And it's true. I mean, now this has shown us that, yes, I mean, some of the entities that were licensed over the years perhaps did not warrant that particular license, and therefore we are now much more careful than we were before. But I think the industry is in a much better place today, and one of the failings that we are doing is trying to assess what was done 10 years ago with the lens of today. And I think that is very dangerous, because we have evolved both as a country, both as individuals working in the industry, both as the EU and the regulation that has come out of the EU. So, at that point in time, things were different. I mean, as far as I know, no one comes up and tells you, listen, set up a company in Malta for me because I want to launder money through it. Because obviously you'd kick them out straight away. So
I hear you, and I agree with you to a certain extent. And there's a bit of a yes and no from my perspective, because there's a pattern that's coming up here within that's emerged through the conversation, which is we're not thinking ahead. So it's important to look back at the last 10 years, not just to learn the lessons, because there are patterns within that. So one of the questions that's come through the audience is it personal gain that's impacting this? Do people think they'll get away with it because we have like this opaque, it's almost expected. So although, yes, we can say there can be a couple of bad apples, we've got to be careful that those bad apples don't corrupt the rest and we make it the standard of business. It's a very, very, very fine line.
I agree with you, and I think we've learned a lot coming through this. And obviously, the ones that are sticking around at the moment want us as a country to come out of the Manival process. We know that it's going to mean more regulation, more supervision, more intrusion, but this is what will make the country be able to take its financial services industry to the next degree, and I'm looking forward to it.
And I would add as well, as Juanita said, that consolidation of service providers is a natural thing to do now, because if in the past we had 600, the regulations and the laws that we had to comply with were much less than they are today. And with all the complexities and with all the legislations coming into force, then you cannot afford to have part-timers, you cannot afford to have individuals who are doing this like on a part-time basis. You either into it full-time and you know what's going on, or else don't be part of it, because then you're going to face problems along the way.
Thank you for that. Look, this has been awesome, because we've had so many questions coming in from the audience. So I apologize, we're not going to actually have time to cover them all, but I will copy them all and continue them on the platform, if that's okay. So you could all chime in there. I'd appreciate that. I'm just going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to ask each of you if there is one thing you would ask the audience to do. So let me ask this question first. How does the panel feel that the EU desire / intention to develop and standardize anti-money laundering supervision and scrutiny through a new body will impact on Malta, particularly in the areas of pan-European intelligence sharing? And then the question is, for the better, surely.
Yeah. I think what is important here and is sharing of information. We spend a lot of time compiling data and preparing and submitting reports. And it will be a great achievement for the EU if someone is trying to set up a structure and is refused to set it up in a particular jurisdiction, that information is shared with the other jurisdiction. Because if he's not allowed to do business in one EU member state, then he should not be allowed to do it in another state. Yeah, and sharing of information, making use of such information, I think is crucial going forward, because it's useless to continue introducing new legislations. I think it's important as well to see what else can we do, right? Sharing of information. I mean, introducing further hefty penalties, more enforcement, because just introducing legislations, it's like having a company with a lot of policies and procedures.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So that's an interesting idea, and I'll tag you on that suggestion, because there's lots and lots of issues to consider, and that's what you're talking about basically is a red flag system. So if you're doing due diligence on a potential client and you've got a red flag, then you log them in the system, and so for anyone else to take them on as a client, they need to counteract that red flag. They need to present information that removes that. So I'll put that as a suggestion, and then we can get some innovators to see if they want to solve that. Right, we're coming up to the top of the hour. So could each of you could suggest one thing our audience can do to play a proactive role in building back better, what would that be? Who wants to go first?
Okay, I think I'll give this a shot. So I think our audience, especially the Maltese audience, let me address them. I think we have a very big Maltese malaise, which is we complain and we complain and we complain, and then we're not very proactive, but we're huge complainers. And I really think that if the industry has to come forward, I think we need more people to engage with regulators, with government, in order to build properly. It's very depressing. I mean, I chair quite a few committees, and I have in the past, and I still do today, on topics like AML, and you have only 2 or 3 people that are really engaged. The rest are just there, not helping much. So I think if we are truly, if we really genuinely believe that we want to rebuild, I think there needs to be much more engagement of the industry going forward. And obviously we need to be much more professional in what we do going forward. As Rudolf mentioned, our business is going to mainly come from international business. So the professionalism, I think, is key. I think this Rudolf's idea of sharing information is great. I would even like to see it on a Malta level. Why should it be that I, as a CSP, turn somebody away only for this person to go down the road and be allowed in by somebody else? I think we should really collectively come up with a system which, if I say no, then it's no to everybody. Okay, perhaps you may say it's wishful thinking and being an idealist, but what the heck? I mean, let's dream, and then we'll see whether the dreams will come true.
Awesome. Nice. I love it. Okay, I'm feeling an innovation challenge coming up here. Rudolf?
Yeah, the problem is not my problem or Juanita's problem. It's the problem of the entire sector. It's the problem of all the financial services practitioners. And it's in the interest of everyone to work together to make sure that as a country, we attract the sustainable investment that we need. But one particular point, which I would like to maybe share, is I think it's important with all the complications that surround us that we have to stay away from the checklist mentality. The due diligence is not just a checklist of you get the passport, the utility bill, etc. But I think it's important as well to understand the business, to understand the intended activities, why the company has been set up. Because then, once you understand it, you can come up with your risk-based approach, right? And it's important in order to be able to filter the new business, the good business from the bad business. So I think relying on senior people, using judgment to assess the client's onboarding as well as the ongoing monitoring is crucial to help us build the reputation as well.
Very good. Thank you. Olivier?
Yeah, so I'm going to talk as a non-Maltese, right? So I grew up in France. I live now in the UK. And for like a stranger viewpoint, the thing about Malta is has this reputational damage, since the Paradise Papers, etc. And I got to meet some people who established their companies in Malta, and from like French and English point of view, you always see Malta as the place where there's a big reason why you want to settle there. It's either you think about taxes, you think about money laundering, because this is the image the media has shown us. And when I was looking at the news from Malta, I found out that there was a big gap between the perception of Maltese articles and the international press vision, right? There was a big gap between those two. And this is mainly happening in all of the countries, right? But mainly in Malta, that's something I found out. And so I guess Malta should being known for something else now. They should focus on innovating in something that would like renew their brand and their image for international people who want to settle there or to want to start their businesses. I'm not too sure how they will do it, but maybe this having an image of this is the best place to start a business because of this, because of that, because of innovation, because of they're helping startups a lot. So that would be a nice way of make Malta and more attractive and avoid this negative image it has so far because of all of these controversies.
Thank you. That's absolutely brilliant and a great way to end this and wrap up. Governance, the G factor, is ultimately a hygiene factor. So we just need to clean up, keep it steady, and reinvent ourselves to be an attractive place for. Yeah, there's so much we can do. And that's another thread that I will start about a new chapter for Malta on what does our future look like. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very, very much for joining us. We hope this has been helpful. Juanita, Rudolph, Olivier, you've been superstars. Thank you very much. And I appreciate it was a hairy topic. I hope that, I hope we did it justice. Do please continue the conversation online, and any questions, feel free to shoot them across to me. Those people who ask questions and I haven't addressed them, I will put them into the platform and they will be addressed there. Thank you very much, and until the next time.